They say the price of power is blood. But what if the price is your soul? Imagine a 13-year-old boy huddled in a cold, dark corner of Topkapi Palace. His eyes are not yet deep enough to understand the word power, yet he has just witnessed an empire change its master. In silence, in the dead of night, no trumpets, no drums, only the lingering scent of incense and fear. And then he is summoned, not to mourn his father, but to replace him, to place upon his head a crown as heavy as his own soul. The year is 1595. Sultan Murad III has drawn his last breath. And the moment his eyes closed, a machine of death was set in motion. The gates of Topkapi slammed shut. Those inside could not leave. Those outside could not enter. And in the heart of that cold, stone labyrinth, a boy was led to a throne of gold and red velvet. His name was Mehmed. No one truly knew him before that night. He was not the son of the chief consort, nor was he the brightest or most favored prince. He was simply a safe name in a game of political calculus. And for that very reason he was chosen. To keep the throne, the blood-soaked laws of the Ottoman Empire were awakened. A decree from the time of Mehmed the Conqueror, the legendary sultan who took Constantinople, stipulated that the new sultan could execute all his brothers to ensure the stability of the throne. They called it the law of fratricide, a law written not in ink, but in the final, ragged breaths of kinsmen. Mehmed was led into a private chamber. No tutors, no advisors, only his mother, Safi Sultan, the woman who had been Murad III's most beloved consort. Now, cloaked in black, she stood behind her son and whispered, "If you want to be king, then let the blood stay behind this door." And the boy nodded, just a single nod, no tears, no trembling. And then the order was given. 19 princes, Mehmed's own half-brothers, were called by name. There was no trial, no accusation. Their only crime was to have been born of the same dead father. Those boys, some of them teenagers, some still babbling their first words, were taken to a sealed room. The Bastanchi, the elite imperial guards, entered without swords or spears. They carried only silken cords, for by law, royal blood was not to be spilled. They strangled each child with soft silk. Not a single scream echoed outside. No blood, but it was more horrifying than any battlefield slaughter. And Mehmed, standing alone before the silver mirror in his father's chamber, stared into his own reflection and said, "I've done it, father. They are gone." Outside, 19 small coffins were buried silently in the night. A new day began, and a new sultan was proclaimed. A boy, no longer a child. They said Mehmed was a child who ruled. But that child, after that cold-blooded night, was no longer human. From the moment he stepped out of that death chamber, Mehmed's eyes were as vacant as a winter lake. No ripples, no wind, just a frozen surface impossible to see through. In the first days of his reign, Mehmed issued no decrees. He did not hold regular court. He organized no grand coronation like his predecessors. He made only one request: "Bring my father's silver mirror and place it in my chamber." It was the mirror Murad III had used every morning. It was not large, nor was it gilded, but its surface was chillingly clear. The servants recounted that from the moment it was moved to Mehmed's room, it was never touched again. The boy sultan spent hours each day standing before it, not to admire his appearance, not to adjust his robes, but to look at something deeper. Servants secretly whispered that, many times, they saw Mehmed mumbling, "Father is there, behind the mercury. He is still watching me. He wants me to keep my word." At night, he did not sleep in his bed. He slept on the cold stone floor, in front of the mirror. He held a silken cord in his hand, not for suicide, but as a talisman, a reminder of his throne's original sin. It was during those grim days that she appeared. No one dared speak her name. No one knew her true status in the new reign. The woman who was once Murad III's most favored consort. The woman who once entered the Sultan's chamber like a shadow. The woman who once lulled Mehmed to sleep in his infancy. Now, she was no longer a mother figure, no longer a part of the past. She was the embodiment of power. No one knew when she moved into the chamber next to Mehmed's. No one dared to ask. They only knew that every morning, before the Sultan awoke, The scent of incense drifted from her room, the very same scent Sultan Murad had used. Rumor had it that she not only blended incense like his father, but she also wore clothes reminiscent of Mem's own late mother, her movements mirroring those of the dead. She chose Mem's clothes each day. She brewed his tea. She corrected every line he was to read before the court. And every time Mehmed was about to sign an edict, he would turn his head, glance toward the curtain where she sat behind a screen, and only then would he write. The palace staff whispered, "Mehmed doesn't rule. The mirror rules. And behind the mirror is her." And the mirror began to crack, a tiny fissure, like a silver thread. But day by day it grew longer, like a rift between two worlds. Mehmed grew more withdrawn. He no longer called her mother. He did not call her wife. He didn't call her anything. There was only one word, whispered each night. "You are there. I see you. I hear you. You never leave. You are me." Topkapi Palace was no longer a seat of governance. It had become a stage. And Mehmed, the young sultan, was merely an actor trapped in a role written by someone else. No wars broke out, no rebellions, but the Ottoman Empire began to fall into a terrifying silence, as if the entire colossal machine was running on the breath of a single woman sitting behind a curtain. Safai Sultan made no declarations. She did not appear before the court, but every edict from Mehmed carried her breath. Harsh punishments, unexpected political decisions, and the mysterious disappearances of officials who had once opposed Mehmed's ascension. When questioned, Mehmed would only say, "I don't recall signing that order, but if it was issued, then it must be correct." The silver mirror remained. The crack grew more distinct, like a tear between two realities. One was the Mehmed of today, and the other was the ghost of his father in the mirror. And then Mehmed began to hear a sound, not a whisper, not a human voice, but a hum, as if echoing from the bottom of a well. The sound would jolt him awake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his eyes cloudy. The sound called him back to his room, back to the mirror. And when he looked, Mehmed didn't see himself. He saw Murad, not all of him, just half a face, the left side, stern and cold. And every time the mirror hummed, he heard a whisper. The heir does not merely keep the throne. The heir must relive the memory. Meanwhile, Safai Sultan consolidated her power. She established a network of spies within the harem, placing her people in every chamber. Consorts were forbidden from contacting Mehmed without her approval. And then she issued an order. All portraits, books, and objects bearing the names or images of the executed princes were to be burned. A complete erasure of memory, as if those 19 souls had never existed. But Mehmed did not forget. He still sat every night, placing his hand on the silken cord, and whispered the name of each dead brother. He would call out slowly each one: Osman, Halil, Sahanger, Mustafa. Each name was a cut into his mind. Each cut was a shard of mercury breaking from the mirror. Then one night, a servant heard a noise from Mehmed's room. Not crying, not a call, but a laugh, a small, fractured laugh, like that of a child discovering something in a dark room. The next morning, Mehmed did not hold court. The chamber door remained closed for 3 days. When the eunuchs finally opened it, they found the sultan lying on the floor. The silver mirror was shattered. On the wall, written in black ink with a left hand, were the words, "I have seen. He is me, and I am no longer afraid." No one knew what the words meant. No one dared to ask. They only knew that from then on, Mehmed spoke to no one, except the new mirror, placed in the exact same spot. And this mirror, this time, reflected nothing at all. Just a dull silver surface, like a fog settling over a sleeping soul. The reign of Mehmed III seemed to drift in a thick, suffocating atmosphere, where every breath felt haunted. No one dared to look the sultan in the eye, nor did anyone dare mention the 19 names that had been erased. But those ghosts, they lingered in every corridor, every dream, every royal decree. While the people outside Istanbul began to whisper that the new sultan was the carrier of the mercury curse, inside the palace, the court officials grew increasingly anxious. The court was no longer a place for strategic debate. All decisions were unilateral, and behind every decision was the invisible hand of Safai Sultan. One day, in a hasty meeting, A high-ranking vizier requested an order to dispatch troops to suppress a regional revolt. Mehmed was silent. He didn't read the report. He simply raised a hand to his face, touching a small, unhealed scratch from the old mirror. Safai appeared from behind the curtain. Not a word, just a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Instantly, Mehmed lowered his hand and declared, "There is no need to send troops. Let them burn themselves out. Those with no ground to stand on will have no strength to fight." Those words, so cold, so devoid of emotion, sent a chill down the spine of everyone in the room. From then on, Mehmed began to isolate himself. Every night, alone in his incense-filled room, he would draw strange symbols on the mirror with his own blood. No one dared to wipe them away. No one dared to ask. But a eunuch later recounted that one symbol was always repeated, a circle with 19 dots inside. The servants believed it was the mark of the dead princes. Penance or perhaps a summoning, no one was sure. And then war came, 1596, the Battle of Mezocarest, a major battle against the Habsburgs, where Mehmed was forced to leave the palace, to step out of the shadows of the harem and truly lead. But Mehmed was not a warrior. He was a walking mirror, reflecting the fear of all those around him. On the first day of the battle, Mehmed stood in the middle of the camp, watching the columns of smoke rise from the enemy side, his face pale. When the Ottoman forces showed signs of faltering, he turned his horse, intending to flee. But one man would not allow it. Hoca Sadeddin Effendi, his loyal tutor, grabbed Mehmed's cloak, holding it fast. "Your Majesty either fights or you die today. But if you turn your back, all of us will turn our backs on you." Mehmed froze. His trembling hand grasped the hilt of a sword he had never drawn. And then, the unthinkable happened. In the chaos of battle, a group of cooks, servants, and stable hands from the Ottoman camp, believing they had been abandoned, suddenly counterattacked with whatever they could find. Wooden spoons, pot lids, campfire logs. This sudden mayhem caused the enemy, who mistook it for a major offensive, to retreat in disarray. The Ottomans were victorious, a victory born of chaos, of luck. It did not come from the Sultan, nor from his command. Upon his return, Mehmed said nothing. But the look in his eyes when he gazed into the mirror was different. He whispered, "I am not worthy, but I am still alive." From then on, the mirror no longer reflected Murad. Instead, it began to reflect a different Mehmed, a version that was no longer a boy, no longer a king, but something in between. And Safai knew it. She said nothing, but she began to burn more incense. A servant said that one night, she whispered to the mirror before sleeping, "They say a mirror cannot speak, but give it enough time, and it will devour a soul." After the bizarre victory at Mezocarests, Mehmed III began to change. Not into a seasoned king, nor an enlightened prince, but into something more distorted, more silent, more detached. It was rumored he began to hear a voice in his head, not of a god, not of his father, but of himself. A different self, one that spoke in a lower, slower voice, and sometimes with more cruelty. His edicts became extreme. Anyone suspected of leaking court information, even a single word, was to be executed immediately, without trial. Once, for merely breaking a vial of incense left by his father, a concubine was hung in the garden for 3 days under the sun. The servants gradually abandoned Mehmed's chambers. Only a few loyal eunuchs remained, and her, Safai Sultan, she was no longer a shadow behind a curtain. She appeared more frequently, walking beside Mehmed as if she were the rightful queen. Whenever Mehmed ate, she was the only one who sat across from him. Whenever Mehmed slept, a soft lullaby could be heard from her bed. No one dared to speak of their relationship. No one dared to ask. But everyone knew there were no boundaries left between them. A eunuch once made the mistake of asking, "Your Majesty, is she the Queen Mother?" The next day, his body was found hanging from the frame of the silver mirror, his eyes still wide open. And then the mirror began to speak, not with sound, but with shadows. Whenever a candle flickered, people said they could see Mehmed's reflection, smiling in the mirror, even as his face outside remained completely blank. One night, Safai entered the room and found Mehmed sitting with his back to her. The silver mirror was in front of him, but the light did not reflect clearly. She asked, "What are you looking at?" Memd did not turn. He only replied, "I see him wearing my crown." Safai walked closer, placing a hand on Mem's shoulder. "No one can wear it but you. You are the Empire, the last of your father's bloodline." Mem turned. For the first time in years, his eyes were not clouded. But in them was a different light, bright as mercury, cold as a blade. He asked, "Then who is my mother?" Safai froze. A second passed. 2. Then she bowed her head, placing her hand on Mem's chest. "The one who makes your heart beat." After that day, Memd no longer held court. The door to his chamber remained shut. No one was allowed in except Safai, and people began to hear a steady recitation every night. Not the Quran, not prayers for the dead, but names, 19 names, read over and over like a ritual, like an execution repeated endlessly. The palace staff called it the silent strangulation ceremony. And then the most terrifying thing happened. The mirror cracked on its own. No one touched it. No one was in the room. But one night, the sound of a fissure echoed like a breaking bone. Memd walked in, looked at the mirror, and smiled. For the first time, he smiled. Not with madness, not with pain, just a smile of release. From that day on, he never looked at the mirror again, because he had seen enough. In the final months of Memd III's reign, Topkapi was sealed in an atmosphere so oppressive it was nameless. No war, no festivals, no regular court sessions. Everything sank into a strange, slow rhythm, as if time itself was hesitant to pass by his throne. And then, the prophecy arrived, not from wise men or priests, but from a beggar with a tangled beard and wild hair, who appeared suddenly at the palace gates on a rainy night. He called himself a dervish, a wandering mystic who lived between madness and truth. As the guards dragged him away, he managed to scream one final sentence. "The one who carries the broken mirror will die in 55 nights. No sooner, no later." Just the words of a madman, surely? But the rumor spread like fire. And when it reached Memd, the young sultan turned pale. Not because he was afraid, but because he believed it. Because exactly 55 nights prior was the night the mirror had cracked. From that day on, Memd counted. He scratched a mark for each day on the wall behind the old mirror, now just an empty wooden frame. On the 10th night, he began wearing his father's robes again. On the 20th night, he ordered all mirrors in the palace to be burned. On the 30th night, he cut his own blood, writing letters to Muslim, Christian, and even Jewish clerics, seeking a way to be cleansed. On the 45th night, he stopped sleeping. He just sat, breathed, and listened, because now, the whispers in the mirror were no longer a dream. They had turned into footsteps. Every time an oil lamp flickered, Memd would turn his head, thinking someone had entered. But there was no one, only the cold. Safai Sultan remained as calm as ever. She lit incense every night, cooked him mint soup like she did in his childhood, and never left the palace. But the servants said they saw her standing before the old mirror frame for hours, her hand on the wood, whispering things no one could understand. Once, when a eunuch asked if she was afraid, she simply replied, "If death comes like a cold wind, then I have lived my whole life in winter." The 55th night arrived. No drums, no bells, no one celebrated, no one prayed. Memd sat alone in his room, dressed in white robes, before the empty mirror frame. The night was unnaturally quiet. A eunuch recounted that, at the stroke of midnight, they heard a faint, soft laugh, like a child's, and then, the sound of something shattering. The next morning, Memd III was found dead. No wounds, no blood, only his eyes wide open, staring into the empty wooden frame before him. And the strangest thing, the silver mirror's frame had been closed by someone, as if it had finished telling its story. The court held a funeral in silence. No one dared to say how he died. No one dared to write down the details of the prophecy. The official historian wrote only a single line. Memd III passed away on a moonless night. There were no witnesses. There was no understanding. And the people began to whisper, "He didn't die. He was simply pulled behind the mirror." Memd III was dead. But his death did not close a chapter of history. It opened a new obsession, not about a man, but about how power is inherited after so much blood and shadow. His successor, Ahmed I, was just a teenager. He was brought to the throne with a face still streaked with tears for his father. The first thing Ahmed did after being proclaimed sultan was not to order the execution of his brothers, as was custom. He just stood there, in the room where his father had sat, looking at the old mirror frame, now taken down and hidden in a secret vault. Then he whispered, "I will not become him." For the first time in a century, the law of fratricide, the law that had cost 19 boys their lives simply for being born, was not enacted. Instead, Ahmed ordered the construction of a sealed chamber in the harem, with no windows, only a single guarded door. That place was called the Cafes. The cage, no executions, but no freedom either. Each of Ahmed's brothers was placed in the Cafes, living in complete isolation. No light, no sound, no self-determination, only time and the echo of their own minds. Ahmed's enemies claimed he was too weak. Historians called him the first to bury his kin in a golden cage. But for Ahmed it was an act of atonement, because at every meal, he still heard whispers from the places his father had lived. In every dream he still saw the image of Mehmed, not as a king, not as a father, but as a shadow. Safai Sultan, after Mehmed's death, retreated to the old palace, living quietly. She no longer interfered in matters of state. But every year, on the night of Mehmed's death, she would still light incense before the old mirror frame. It is said that a young servant once asked her if she had any regrets. Safai just gave a faint smile. Power does not need affection. It only needs someone willing to stand in the shadow. History would not remember Mehmed III as a hero or a tyrant. He was forgotten among greater names. But the legacy he left was not so easily erased. Mehmed's death did not end at the graveyard. It lived in the windowless walls. It lived in the hidden mirror frames. And it lived in the silence of those who came to the throne after him. Because when the blood stopped flowing, people realized silence can also kill, and sometimes more terrifying than any sword is a memory. Years after the death of Mehmed III, the walls of Topkapi still stood, silently witnessing the succession of dynasties. But something was no longer whole, not the stone and mortar, but the soul of the palace. Visitors who pass through the old corridors often feel an unnamed chill, especially in the northeastern wing, where the silver mirror once stood. They report a feeling of being watched from behind. Though when they turn, there is only brick and the quiet flicker of candlelight. An English scholar, granted access to the Topkapi archives in the early 20th century, wrote a cryptic line in his notebook. "The mirror frame is sealed with a red thread, but at night, I saw a thin mist on the wood, as if someone were breathing from the other side." Official history calls Mehmed III the victor of Mesocarests, but folklore calls him by another name, the Sultan who wouldn't look in the mirror. No one knows who first gave him that name. Perhaps a surviving lady-in-waiting. Perhaps a descendant of one of the 19 princes. But the name spread quickly, crossing the borders of the Ottoman Empire. In the Balkans, a legend says that if you stand before a mirror on a moonless night and call Mehmed's name 3 times, you will hear a faint wind like the tightening of a silken cord. And when people ask about Safai Sultan, no one is sure if she ever truly existed. The portraits of her are all blackened or blurred. One infamous conspiracy theory says she was an immortal spirit, the keeper of balance in the harem, a ghost in silk brocade, who lives to teach sultans their final lesson. Do not love me. Do not fear me. Let me teach you how to become a demon. Once, a history teacher was telling the story of Mehmed III to a small class of children. When he finished with the sultan's death before the mirror, an innocent child asked, "So where is the mirror now?" The teacher gave a forced smile and dodged the question. It was probably shattered to pieces. But that night, the teacher dreamed of a young man in a white robe, holding a mirror frame and tapping on his window, smiling. "No, it's still here." The reign of Mehmed III ended like a wisp of incense smoke, dissipating into an air no one dared to name. No monuments, no epics, no one praised him, but no one forgot, because some kings live not to be remembered, but to serve as a warning. In an empire that was once the mightiest in the world, a boy was placed on a throne too soon, burdened by blood-stained laws, and with a heart that had to learn to kill before it could learn to love. They called him a fratricide, a madman, a tyrant with his mother's ghost in his heart. But if history is a great mirror, then we too must look at ourselves and see if we are not the ones who create monsters with the very laws we leave behind. Mem 3 was not a devil, nor was he entirely a victim. He was the product of a world too accustomed to silence in the face of evil. And the silver mirror, the most haunting symbol of the entire story, still lies somewhere in the heart of history, no longer reflecting the face of a king, but reflecting the gaze of every generation on how power is built. Look into that mirror and ask, if you were that 13-year-old boy, what would you have chosen?